Today we're going to talk about a new concept called absolute value. So absolute value means a number's distance from zero. And so the key concept here is that distance is always expressed as positive. If you think about it, no matter whether I'm standing to the left or the right of you, let's say 5 feet, I can never be negative 5 feet away from you. That doesn't make sense. I would be either 5 feet to your left or 5 feet to your right. But distance, it only makes sense to express as positive. So a good example is golf. So if I look at this as the hole, the pin, and I look at my ball here, I was 6 yards short of the pin. Let's say that I'm hitting the ball this way. But if I asked you how far I am from the pin, the hole, you would not say I'm negative 6 feet away. That doesn't make sense. The distance can't be expressed that way. You would just simply say I am 6 feet away from the hole. So this is an example of absolute value. We use these lines here. We use these lines here to represent absolute value. So if you notice up here, I put the lines around negative 6 to show that what I'm really talking about is the absolute value of negative 6. Its distance from 0. It wouldn't have mattered if I was on this side. If I was here, the absolute value of positive 6 would still be expressed as 6. Because really with distance, it doesn't matter what side of the target, which is 0, that you're on. It just matters how far away you are. And far indicates distance, which is positive. So let's look at a few examples here. So I'm looking at problem number 3 on your worksheet here. And the question says, the absolute value of negative 12 is greater than the absolute value of 5. However, when you look at their actual value, the actual value of negative 12 is less than positive 5. Now, how's that the case? Why is that the case? And it's because with this first inequality here, right, we kind of joke the alligator, we're talking about distance from 0. That is what these lines mean. It's distance from 0. So when I look at, negative 12 and positive 5, I'm just a rough estimation here. Negative 12 would be, let's say, down here, where positive 5 would be here. You see that the distance from 0 to 5 is indeed 5. Its absolute value is 5. Whereas this absolute value, right, from negative 12 to 0 is greater. It's 12 units from 0, right? So this distance right here, even though it's in negative world here, it doesn't matter. Its distance is greater than this other number's distance, okay? So up here, we kind of wrote a little explanation, right? The first inequality is dealing with absolute value, which is simply distance. Since the distance of negative 12 to 0 is greater than the distance of positive 5 to 0, this is why we write the absolute value of negative 12 is greater than 5. The second inequality is simply talking about real value, just actual numeric value, right? So since that deals with the actual value, we would say that positive 5 is actually a higher valued number, because we know on a number line to the right is, right, greater value, not absolute value, but actual value. And to the left is less value, right? So it's important to distinguish the difference between absolute value and regular, normal value, okay? So let's try another one of these. So let's go to number 4. So some of these problems will give you something like this. Now, I already wrote the answer down, but you will have something like this. What is the absolute value of negative 1 and 1/4? One thing that I imagine some of you are noticing is that the absolute value of number is just simply the number itself, but expressed positively. So I wrote a little noticing here. The answer will always be the same number, the same digits. So the answer is going to be 1 and 1/4, but we don't put a negative sign because this is truly distance. You can't write distance as negative. It doesn't make sense. Okay, let's do another example down here. What is the absolute value of 1/2? So what I'm really asking is how far is this number here from 0? Well, it's half of a unit. So that's why I wrote my answer as 1/2. So another noticing I have is we're not asking about the opposite number, because the opposite of 1/2 is negative 1/2. That's not the absolute value. The absolute value is the distance from 0. So this is different from opposite numbers, as every absolute value is positive. right? So regardless of whether the number is negative or positive, the absolute value is going to be just simply that number expressed in a positive manner. Okay? Now, why is this useful, right? Some kids I notice will sometimes be like, well, you're just telling me to write the number again, but just positive every time? Yes, but that's not why this is important. So I just gave an example here, right? Anything that deals with distance is going to use this thought process. So if you had a problem on a worksheet that might say, what is the distance from -5 to +3 on a number line? You could think through absolute value. So I'm actually going to start with the wrong way. If you were to think to just combine these numbers, -5 plus 3, the answer to that is actually -2. That's not correct. Okay? What you really want to think to yourself is the distance between here back to 0 is 5. The distance between +3 back to 0 is 3. Well, that entire distance could be figured out by adding these two absolute values together. Now you notice I didn't write -5 units. Distance is always positive. So these 5 units plus these 3 units would be 8 units. So this distance, the answer to this question would be 8 units because the absolute value of -5 is 5. The absolute value of 3 is 3. And when combined, we make 8. So this is just an example of why this might be